My name is Luke Carson. I'm 41 years old, a former Marine sergeant, and I come from a place where the wind speaks louder than most people do. A place where you measure a man by how steady he walks the fence line, not how loud he talks in town. I was born and raised in Fremont County, Wyoming, on a piece of land my grandfather homesteaded after World War II. It's 17 acres of hard soil, tall grass, and wind that never stops moving. Nothing Fancino vineyard dreams or real estate value projections. Just a simple hayfield, a weathered barn, and a small herd of horses that don't ask much except that you show up on time. For 3 generations, that land held my family together. My dad, William Carson, was a Vietnam vet who came home in 1973 and never left the property again. He worked that field every year until cancer finally beat his stubbornness in 2018. He wasn't a sentimental man, didn't care for ceremony or long goodbyes. But the last thing he ever said to me sitting on that porch in early spring with a blanket over his knees was this: "You take care of that land, Luke. It's not just dirt, it's blood memory." I didn't need him to explain it. I already knew. After his funeral, I put my re-enlistment papers through the shredder. I'd done my years in the Corps, worn the uniform long enough. The land needed someone who'd be there through the quiet seasons, the winters when nothing grows, and the springs when everything needs fixing all at once. So I stayed. I patched up the roof on the barn, replaced a third of the fencing, and slowly started bringing the place back from the edge. I didn't do it for resale value. I did it because that land was the last physical piece of who we were. When a wind blows down from the ridge, I can still hear my dad's hammer in the rafters. In 2016, I met Alicia. She came into town with a wellness retreat, taught yoga at the community center on Tuesdays and Saturdays. I'm not the type to fall for candles and soft voices, but there was something about her that was grounding. She wasn't from around here, but she said she wanted peace, stability, roots. She talked about the land like it was sacred, like it helped her breathe. That mattered to me. We got married a year later, nothing fancy. Just close friends, a pastor who owed me a favor, and a ceremony under the old oak tree behind the barn. At first, it felt like we had the same vision. She planted herbs by the porch, made jam from our blackberries, talked about turning the barn into a wellness center someday. I let her dream, and she let me be quiet. It worked for a while, but I've learned something since then. Some people fall in love with the idea of land, not the land itself. They like what it represents: freedom, space, something untouched. But they don't always understand what it costs. The broken knuckles, the sleepless storms, the deep kind of quiet that forces you to face yourself. My father left me a patch of soil and a promise. I honored both, but the person I trusted most saw it differently. And betrayal, I've learned, doesn't always come with screaming. Sometimes it arrives with a soft voice, a digital signature, and a plan you were never meant to see. Alicia and I got married on a cool October afternoon, right under the oak tree behind the barn. No DJ, no cake-cutting ceremony, no choreographed dances. Just a rented arch made of driftwood, a local pastor with a voice like gravel, and the sound of dry leaves catching the wind. She wore a linen dress she'd sewn herself, simple and flowing. I wore my father's silver watch and a clean pair of jeans. My best man was a horse named Dalton, standing behind a fence, looking half-interested. That was our kind of day. After the wedding, she moved in full-time. She brought with her an air of calm I didn't know I needed. Her books lined the living room, shelves titles on energy balance, inner stillness, whole food nutrition. She painted the kitchen a soft eggshell blue, planted lavender by the back step, and started waking up earlier than I did to sit with her tea and journal at sunrise. I admit I liked that life. It felt slower than the one I'd lived. Steadier, maybe. For a time, it seemed like we both understood what it meant to build something real, not just survive. She took interest in the land, even if she didn't always understand it. She'd ask questions about irrigation, fencing costs, livestock management, mostly just listening while I spoke. Sometimes I catch her photographing the barn from odd angles or sketching plans in a notebook. She once said, "This place feels like it's waiting to be more than it is." I asked her, more for who? She smiled. For both of us. The barn became her canvas. Alicia had big ideas. She wanted to turn part of it into a yoga retreat space. Said we could host veterans with PTSD, offer breathing classes, healing weekends. It's not just about farming, Luke, she said. It's about healing soil and healing people. Same thing, really. I didn't disagree. In fact, I saw potential in it. But I also knew this land wasn't built on hashtags and herbal detox. It was built on consistency, on showing up, rain or shine, when no one's clapping for you. Still, I encouraged her. I cleared space in the barn, put in a few new rafters, let her paint the east wall white. We even hosted a small retreat, 5 guests, most of them from out of state. Alicia led the sessions while I grilled burgers out back and made sure no one parked on the septic line. It went well, better than I expected, but the more traction her ideas gained, the more I felt something shifting beneath the surface. It wasn't tension, not at first, just a slow, quiet recalibration. She started spending more time online. Her small wellness blog began turning into something bigger: sponsorship deals, affiliate links, crypto talk. She got into Ethereum before most people knew how to pronounce it. Diversifying, she called it. The future doesn't run on hay bales and trust funds. Luke, I didn't argue. I didn't have a pension to protect, just 17 acres of hard-earned land and a belief that you should never borrow against something you aren't willing to lose. She started attending digital finance meetups, talked about tokens, smart contracts, DAO ecosystems, things I couldn't explain then and don't particularly care to now. It wasn't the tech that bothered me. It was how she started looking at the land, not like a place, but like an asset. Luke, we've got $400,000 just sitting here in equity. You realize that, right? I remember that conversation. It was early spring. We were sitting on the porch after dinner. I had a coffee in my hands. She had her laptop open, mid-sentence in a Zoom call she just wrapped up. I looked out at the field where my father and I once dug fence posts by hand. It's not just dirt, I told her. I'm not saying it is, she replied, her tone calm. But maybe it could work for us instead of against us. She used words like liquidity and strategic unlocking of capital. I heard leverage, debt, exposure. Still, I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded and asked her if she wanted dessert. A few weeks later, she suggested putting a portion of the property into an LLC. Just for tax benefits, she said. It's cleaner on paper. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't. Instead, I started going over every deed, every title, every document I had stored in the old lockbox inside the closet. Everything was still in my name. The land, the house, the original title transfer from my father, notarized and sealed. But something in my gut was pulling tight, like a horse sensing a storm. Then came the week she asked about power of attorney. She phrased it gently, like it was just a precaution, just good planning in case I ever got sick or injured. She even smiled when she said it, the same smile she used the first night we danced barefoot in the barn. I didn't say no. I said I'd think about it. That night, I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling and thought about how quickly trust can shift from habit to hazard. Alicia still kissed me goodnight, still asked me how the pasture rotation was going, still brewed her morning tea before sunrise. But something was different. The land didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt watched. And that's when I started preparing silently, carefully, without accusation or drama. Because when a person begins talking about your legacy like a ledger line, you don't push back with emotion. You fortify. It started small, the way a fence post leans a little before it falls. You don't see the collapse at first. You see a shadow, a slight tilt in the way things used to stand. That's how it began with Alicia. She still made tea in the mornings, still kissed me on the cheek before bed. But something in the rhythm changed. Conversations shortened. Eye contact slipped. And more, I found her in the guest room with the door closed, headphones in, voice lowered to a whisper. I didn't snoop. That's not who I am. But I'm also not a fool. One night, she left her laptop open. Nothing obvious, just a spreadsheet. But the header read, Asset Liquidation Timeline Target Q3. It wasn't mine. It wasn't hers. It was ours. The land. My father's land. Our home. Reduced to bullet points and sell dates. I didn't say anything. Instead, I went out to the barn and sat in the dark for an hour. Just me and the wind slipping through the old boards. That's when I decided, no more assuming. No more hoping she'd explain herself. I had to see it all for what it was. I started paying attention to details. The checking account we shared had quiet changes, little transfers, just a few hundred at a time. Once a week. Twice sometimes. Always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic alerts. The payee line just read, Harvest Path Consulting. I never heard of them. I looked it up the next morning. It was a shell company, registered to a co-working address out in San Diego. Their site was vague, lots of buzzwords like capital alignment, crypto forward futures, and property scalability. I wasn't sure what Alicia had gotten into, but I knew one thing: she wasn't just blogging about wellness anymore. I checked the property records through the county's online portal. The land was still in my name, thank God. But I noticed a recent request for valuation filed anonymously but tied to our address. That's usually a sign someone's shopping the land around, seeing what they could get if it went on the market. Alicia hadn't mentioned it. No surprise there. So I quietly made copies of everything: property titles, bank statements, login histories. I backed it all up to 2 hard drives. One I kept locked in my gun safe. The other I mailed to my cousin Eli in Montana, along with a note. Just hold this. No questions. He called anyway. I didn't pick up. Some answers don't need conversations, they need protection. Then came the second red flag. I'd gone into town to get feed and stopped by the bank to deposit a check from a side fencing job. One of the tellers, Carrie Ho's known me since I was 17, pulled me aside. Said, Luke, not my place, but did you authorize a signature on a loan inquiry for the property? My stomach dropped. I said no, I hadn't. She hesitated. I thought so. Something felt off. It was signed Luke Carson, but it didn't look right. The C in Carson curved backward. Yours never does. I thanked her. Quietly. Calmly. That night, I checked the mailbox and found something addressed to both of us. A glossy brochure for a new development called Ridgeline Retreats. Spa homes. High-end cabins. Planned for construction exactly where our north field stretched flat into the horizon. It wasn't even subtle. She hadn't just considered selling. She was positioning the land for developers. And doing it while I was right there, feeding horses, fixing fences, trying to make a future on land soaked in my father's sweat. But again, I didn't yell. Didn't storm the house with questions. Instead, I started removing valuables. Quietly. I boxed up my father's service medals, my grandfather's hunting knife, even a framed discharge papers from my own time in the Corps. I put them all in the back of the truck and drove them to my sister's place in Cody. When she asked what was going on, I just said, protecting what matters. Then I called my attorney Reed Walters, a quiet man in his 60s who once helped my dad through a boundary dispute in '92. Told him to start researching trust protections and irrevocable asset clauses. I didn't accuse Alicia of anything yet. Not in words. But she must have sensed something, because the temperature in the house shifted. She was overly polite, careful with her tone, asked more than once if I was feeling okay. I told her I'm fine, just taking care of things in case life throws a curve. She smiled. That's why I love you. You always think ahead. She had no idea. By that point, I'd already pulled a title lock on the property, set up alerts with the county registrar, filed a freeze on any attempt to transfer ownership without both wet signatures not digital. I also moved the farm's EIN into a different holding account that she didn't have access to. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity and control, because sometimes the betrayal isn't the scream. It's the silence, the planning behind closed doors, the signatures written with someone else's curve. And if the ground is starting to shift beneath you, you don't panic. You anchor. It was a Wednesday when it finally happened. Not a dramatic day, just a clear, windless morning in late June. I'd spent the early hours oiling the hinges on the south gate and patching a cracked water line near the barn. By 11:30, I was dusty, tired, and ready for lunch. That's when the knock came. Not from the front door, from the back where deliveries go. I opened it and found a man in a black polo shirt and slacks, clipboard in hand, standing next to a silver SUV. You Luke Carson? I nodded. Depends who's asking. He handed me an envelope. Certified transfer confirmation. I'm just here to verify property access for upcoming site inspections. I didn't answer right away. He pointed toward the field behind the barn. Northwest parcel. 17 acres. Zone for mixed development as of last week. I didn't look at the paper. Not yet. I just stared at that man, his confidence, his clipboard, the SUV idling behind him, and something in my chest pulled tight. After he left, I sat down on the porch, opened the envelope, and read every line. Twice. She'd sold it. Not all of it, but the north parcel, the original section of the homestead. The part my grandfather cleared by hand after the war. The part where my father's ashes were buried, beneath the cottonwood by the creek. The signature on the sale agreement wasn't forged. It was real. Mine. At least, the digital version of it. I knew immediately what had happened. Weeks ago, Alicia had suggested syncing our estate planning with an e-signature platform for convenience. She'd framed it like a normal household update paperwork for emergencies, refinancing options, stuff married people did. And I'd agreed. She'd used that access used me to greenlight the sale of our land to a holding company in Jackson, masked behind a trail of shell LLCs. The payment had already cleared. The deposit had gone into an account I'd never seen before. In her name only. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood at the sink for 20 minutes without drinking it. That evening, she came home like nothing had happened. Kissed my cheek. Asked what I wanted for dinner. I said nothing. I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I waited until she was in the shower. I walked into the office, opened her laptop, and found the trail wide open. There were emails with real estate agents, crypto investors, even a lawyer someone in Salt Lake City she'd been using quietly for months. In one thread, she wrote, "He won't fight it. He's loyal but tired. He'll let it go." That line hit harder than the sale itself. She hadn't just betrayed me. She'd underestimated me. I didn't confront her that night, or the next, because this wasn't going to be fixed in a conversation. This needed strategy. So I called Reed, my lawyer, told him everything. He listened without interruption, then asked a single question. "You want it back? Or you want retribution?" I paused. "I want it back." Reed laid out my options. It was a gray area legally. Technically, I'd authorized access. But if we could prove deceit, hidden assets, and digital manipulation, we had a case. Not a slam dunk, but winnable. We started building. I gave him the documents, the screenshots, the access logs, and that one email, "He'll let it go." That line was the nail. Over the next 10 days, we filed suit for fraudulent misrepresentation, asset concealment, and breach of marital fiduciary duty. Quietly. No threats. No dramatics. Just paperwork. She didn't know. Not until she got served. It was a Friday morning. I was fixing the tiller in the shed when I heard her yell my name from the front porch. She stood there, barefoot, envelope in hand, fury simmering under the surface. "You're suing me?" she hissed. I wiped the grease off my hands. "No, I'm defending what's mine." She started to speak some mix of rationalization and insult, but I cut her off. "You didn't just sell dirt, Alicia. You sold legacy, and you did it with a smile." Her face crumbled. For the first time in weeks, she looked unsure. But I didn't give her time to recover. I walked past her into the house and started gathering the few things I knew I wanted to keep close. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I withdrew. That weekend, I moved into a small cabin owned by an old friend 3 miles from the property line, but far enough that her plans didn't touch me. Reed kept me updated. The case was moving. Fast. And Alicia? She panicked. Because suddenly, her buyers were skittish. Her paper trail wasn't clean. And the money? Frozen under court order. Within 2 weeks, her holding pattern unraveled. And the land? It was still there untouched. But it wouldn't be for long. That's when I decided, if she thought I'd give it up quietly, she hadn't paid attention to the man she married. Because when someone sells your foundation, you don't just recover. You rebuild. And this time, I'd build something no one could take. There's a saying my father used to repeat when I was a kid. Don't outshout the storm. Outlast it. That's exactly what I plan to do. After Alicia was served, things unraveled quickly for her, anyway. She tried to call me half a dozen times that week. I let each one go to voicemail. I wasn't interested in hearing her explain how things got out of hand. Things don't accidentally cross lawyers and escrow officers. That takes planning, intent, decision. What she hadn't planned on was me fighting back with silence. While she tried to spin the situation in her favor, I went to work quietly. The court had frozen the funds tied to the sale of the North parcel. It was under review, pending the fraud investigation Reed and I initiated. That meant the money she'd counted on was untouchable, and the sale itself was in jeopardy. But I wasn't content to just stall her plans. I wanted that land back. And not just because it was mine on paper, but because it was ours in memory. So I reached out to the buyer at a holding company in Jackson. Turns out, the man behind it wasn't some slick corporate type. His name was Darren McCall, a mid-level land investor who lived in Laramie and had made his name flipping rural plots to eco-tourism developers. He sounded tired when he picked up the phone. "I'm calling about parcel 1709, I said. He sighed. "You're the husband." "Yes, sir." I figured. There was a pause. Then he added, "You're not the first landowner I've heard from after the ink dried." I told him the truth briefly. I told him about the legacy, about my father's ashes by the cottonwood, about how I had no intention of making trouble, but every intention of making it right. "You trying to buy it back?" he asked. "If the numbers make sense." He paused again. "Well, the thing is the zoning change we applied for it stuck. The county flagged the title transfer. They don't want to touch anything until your court case clears." I let that hang for a beat. "So right now, it's just dirt with red tape on it." He chuckled. "That's about right." I didn't push. I didn't bargain. I simply said, "I'd like first right of refusal if you walk away." He agreed. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office and made that agreement official signed, notarized, and logged. Then I did something even Alicia didn't see coming. I started raising capital. Not through loans. Not through banks. I wasn't interested in putting my future into someone else's hands. Instead, I called a few people I'd served with over the years, veterans who'd always talked about wanting space. Not space to retire. Space to heal. Real land. Open sky. A place where they didn't have to explain why loud noises made them flinch or why they slept with their boots next to the bed. I told them I had an idea. A working veteran co-op. Agricultural. Hands-on. Minimal structure. Maximum dignity. No uniforms. No therapists with clipboards. Just a plot of land and a plan to use it with purpose. The response was bigger than I expected. 6 guys said yes immediately. 2 more asked if they could bring family. 1 offered to donate equipment he'd stored since his dad passed. Another said he'd been looking for a way out of the city for years. So I started drafting blueprints not for houses, but for cabins. Small, practical, self-built. Each one no bigger than 400 square feet. Enough to sleep, cook, and breathe. Nothing more. Darren called a week later. "I'm pulling out," he said. "Not worth the hold-up." "What's your ask?" I replied. He gave me a Namera fair one. Less than Alicia had sold it for. The market had shifted, and red tape wasn't cheap. I didn't haggle. I said done. 2 weeks later, the North parcel was back in my name. No celebration. No speech. Just a man standing in a field again, hands in his pockets, breathing in the same Wyoming air his grandfather once did. I built the first cabin myself, simple pine frame, metal roof, wood-burning stove. Took me 9 days. The second one went faster. The third, I had help. By fall, there were 6 veterans living on that land. One was a retired Navy corpsman who hadn't spoken to his own son in 4 years. Another was a Marine like Metwist, divorced, sober 3 years, still sleeping on a cot he kept under his bedroll. We worked the land together. Hauled compost. Fixed fencing. Planted cover crops. Nobody asked about the past. We just built one board, one fence post, one meal at a time. Alicia didn't come around. Word must have gotten to her that I'd reclaimed the property. I heard she'd moved to Arizona, found another opportunity with a holistic investment group. Good for her. As for me, I stopped checking her social media the day the title came back with my name on it. Because the truth is, I didn't win anything. I simply rebuilt what should have never been taken. And this time I built it stronger. Not for profit, not for show, for people who know the weight of silence and the value of solid ground. If someone had told me 5 years ago that my life's second chapter would start with a half-finished cabin and a busted generator, I would have laughed. But that's exactly where it began. The co-op didn't have a name at first. Just a dirt trail off County Road 17 and a hand-painted sign that read, simply, home. A little crooked, a little weather-worn. But honest, that word mattered more than most. We weren't building a business. We were building a reason to wake up. Each of us had come from somewhere fractured. Divorce, deployment, estrangement, you name it. None of us talked about it much. But we felt in the way we moved carefully, deliberately, like men who knew what it meant to be broken and still show up. The cabins were nothing fancy, 400 square feet of reclaimed lumber, recycled insulation, tin roofs that rattled like maracas in the wind. But they were ours. Each guy built his own, with help when needed, but never pressure. You'd hear a circular saw start up at sunrise and a hammer ringing well past dark. Some of the builds were perfect, others were rough, a little crooked. Nobody judged. We all understood that every nail driven was a step back towards steady ground. I started keeping a whiteboard on the side of the old barn tasks for the week. Fix the water pump. Rehang the gate on lot 2. Split wood for the new guy, Matt, who just arrived from Michigan with nothing but a backpack and a box of tools. Folks started dropping off supplies. Not officially, just quietly. A retired mechanic from town left 4 boxes of bolts and spark plugs at the edge of the driveway. A church group brought winter coats. One morning, I found a crate of fresh eggs with a note for the boys to remember what service looks like. We never asked. We just thanked them when we could. Every Friday night, we made a pot of chili and sat around the fire pit. No rules, no speeches. Sometimes we talked about fishing. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. But nobody was alone. That silence, the good kind, was something most of us hadn't felt in years. There were no clocks to the co-op. No deadlines. We rose with the sun and rested when the work was done. Guys took turns cooking. We built a communal garden, nothing fancy. Just rows of tomatoes, beans, and late-season squash. Tending it became therapy. One morning, Jacob, the youngest of us, barely 30, stood beside me, hands in his pockets, looking at the rows. "You ever think we'd end up here?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, but I think we needed to." He nodded. "Feels like this land was waiting for us." Maybe it was. We named it Cottonwood Ridge, after the tree by the creek. The one with my father's ashes. The one Alicia had tried to sell to someone who couldn't tell the difference between legacy and leverage. We registered the co-op as a nonprofit Veterans for Land Stewardship. Reed helped with the paperwork. Grants came slow, but they came. We weren't chasing big headlines, just small victories. We got solar panels donated by a company out of Billings, built a tool shed, set up a rainwater collection system, even installed Wi-Fi eventually, though half the guys still preferred handwritten notes tacked to the barn wall. Then, something I didn't expect happened. A counselor from the VA center in Cheyenne reached out. Said one of her clients recently discharged, struggling with adjustment, had heard about us. "He's got good hands," she said. "Just needs quiet." We took him in. His name was Luis. Army combat engineer. Sharp eyes. Kept to himself. First week, he barely spoke. Just helped Jacob reinforce his porch and repaired the old tractor without being asked. Second week, he came a chilly night. Didn't say much, but sat with us. By the third week, he started laughing at Mike's dumb jokes. And by the end of the month, he built a shed behind his cabin with a window facing sunrise. That's how healing happened out here. Slowly, without declarations. One morning, I got up early and found Luis sitting on the porch with his dog, drinking coffee. He looked at me and said, "I didn't know quiet could feel like this." I nodded. Neither did I. I realized then that this place, this land, had just been saved from a bad deal. It had been repurposed, not in the way Alicia planned, not as some retreat center for influencer packages, but as something far more lasting. A home for those who knew what loss looked like and still chose to plant something new. I hadn't seen Alicia in over a year. Not since that day on the porch when I handed her the fraud packet and walked away without a backward glance. I figured that was the last chapter. Some stories end quietly, and I was fine with that. But life has a way of circling back. It was early spring when I saw her again. The kind of Wyoming morning where the frost clings just a little longer than you'd like, and the wind carries a bite. I'd driven into town to drop off lumber plans at the supply co-op. Stopped at the coffee shop on Main for a cup to go. And there she was, sitting by the window alone. Same posture, same way of tapping her thumb against the cup lid when she was lost in thought. She looked older, not in a harsh way, just like someone who'd lived through a few things and wasn't pretending otherwise anymore. She saw me before I turned to go, raised her hand, not a wave, just a signal. The kind people give when they're asking for 5 minutes. Nothing more. I stood there for a second. Could have walked. Almost did. But something held me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was grace. I walked in. She didn't speak right away. Just motioned to the chair across from her. I sat. The silence stretched. Cottonwood Ridge. The co-op. I nodded. It's impressive. I didn't reply. I didn't come here to make excuses, she added. I know what I did. I know how I did it. I appreciated that. Not because I needed her to feel bad, but because it saved us both the time of rewriting the past. I lost a lot, she said, eyes still on her coffee. Money, friends, reputation. I stayed quiet. Let her speak if she needed to. But none of that really hurt, she continued. What hurt was realizing that I wasn't the one who rebuilt. She looked up then, and there it was clarity. You didn't just take it back, she said. You turned it into something I couldn't have imagined. I set my cup down. It wasn't about proving anything. I just didn't want the story to end with your version. She nodded slowly. I guess I thought you'd fight harder back then. Scream, threaten, drag it out. You thought wrong, I said. You always did when it came to how I handle pain. She swallowed. I wanted to feel powerful. After all the years of feeling small. That's not how power works, I replied. You don't find it by erasing someone else's name from a deed. She closed her eyes. I know that now. Another pause. This one's shorter. I'm moving, she said. To Washington. Starting over. Somewhere no one knows me. I didn't ask why. I didn't wish her luck. I just listened. Then she reached in her bag and pulled out an envelope. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I want you to have this. Inside was a check. Small by some standards. But symbolic. The last of what I made off the sale, she said. It's yours. Should have been all along. I slid it back across the table. Put it towards something good. Not as payment. Just direction. She stared at the envelope. Then tucked it away. You really are better without me, she said softly. I didn't smile. Didn't agree or disagree. Some things don't need commentary. Instead, I stood up. Take care of yourself, Alicia. She looked up. You too. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the wind had picked up. I zipped my jacket, pulled my cap down tighter, and crossed the street to my truck. When I got back to Cottonwood Ridge, the guys were clearing the trail down to the new greenhouse site. Jacob waved. Luis gave a chin nod from the compost pile. Scout, my dog, ran up from the creek, tongue lolling, tail wagging. I knelt beside him, ran my hand along his back. That conversation with Alicia didn't rattle me. Didn't unseat the ground I'd fought to regain. It just reminded me of the difference between closure and permission. You don't need the person who broke something to help you heal it. You just need purpose. This land had become more than legacy. It was redemption built not from rage, but from resolve. That night, I sat on the porch, watching the stars sharpen as the cold crept in. Behind me, laughter echoed from the fire pit. Another story, another recovery. And I thought about what Alicia said. She was right. She didn't rebuild. But I did. And I did it the quiet way. The strong way. The way that holds. The older I get, the more I understand my father. Not just the words he said, but the way he said them. How he never rushed. How he'd take a long breath before answering a hard question. How he believed in fixing what was broken not by gluing the cracks, but by understanding why they formed in the first place. It's been over 2 years since Cottonwood Ridge became real, since I stepped foot on the north parcel after the title was back in my name. Some days I still walk the fence line at dawn, boots wet with dew, coffee in hand. Just to remind myself, this is real. This was earned. But now it's more than land. It's legacy. When my father passed, we buried his ashes beneath the cottonwood tree on the north edge of the ridge. That wasn't a casual decision. He'd asked for it, say that spot was the first place he ever felt bigger than his worries. He was a quiet man, not given to poetic talk. So when he said that, I knew it mattered. That tree's still there. Taller now, stronger. Its roots spread wide across ground that nearly slipped away. And under its branches, I finally understand what he meant. See, legacy isn't what you leave behind in assets. It's what endures in intention. Alicia thought she could sell land and bury history. But she never knew the story. Not really. She never stood beside my father during harvest season, watching the fields turn gold under Wyoming's sun. Never heard him talk about how his own father planted every post in the southern fence line by hand. Never sat with us on the porch while the storm clouds built behind the butte and the air smelled like sage and rain. Legacy isn't inherited. It's carried. And now, it's carried by more than just me. Luis runs the greenhouse. What started as a trial has become a system 3 beds deep, stacked shelves, LED rigs for the winter. He tracks everything in a notebook he keeps in his back pocket. Won't use apps. Says the page feels more real. Jacob teaches woodworking twice a week to kids from town. He's not flashy, just patient. One girl, maybe 13, built a footstool for her grandma and painted flowers along the legs. Said it was the first time she'd ever used a drill. That mattered. Mike Marine, 61, widower, manages tools and maintenance. He built a rotating compost system that actually works. Keeps a logbook cleaner than any Army inventory sheet I've ever seen. He whistles when he works. Not loudly. Just enough to let you know things are okay. Each man brought his own fracture. Each one rebuilt. Not by pretending things were fine, but by choosing the next right thing. We don't talk much about our pasts. Not unless someone asks. And even then, the answers come slow, honest, and without drama. No one's trying to outstory anyone else here. Because here, you're not measured by what broke you. You're measured by what you built after. Last fall, a local reporter visited. Wanted to write a piece for a regional magazine. Said our model was inspiring, that the community could learn something from our approach. I told her we weren't a story. We were just men who'd run out of other options and decided to build one. She smiled, said that was even better. When the article came out, people started sending letters. Veterans, widows, folks whose sons hadn't come home from war or who had but never fully arrived. They wanted to visit, not to tour, just to see, to breathe where peace wasn't a performance. We said yes, quietly, and one by one they came. Some stayed a night, some stayed for months. A few never left. We don't advertise. No signs off the highway. No social media strategy. But word gets around, the way truth does. Cottonwood Ridge has become a place where men learn to trust their hands again, where trauma is acknowledged, not analyzed, where land actual dirt and sea does what therapy sometimes can't, gives you something to grow with. And that, I think, is the greatest legacy. Not that I took the land back, but that I gave it a new story, a true one where betrayal didn't win, where the man who was underestimated became the steward of something whole. The other day, I found a photograph in one of my father's old toolboxes. It was black and white, slightly curled at the edges. Showed him at 28, standing next to the very same cottonwood tree with a shovel in one hand and a smile that knew work wasn't something you escaped. It was something you gave yourself to. I framed it, hung in the barn, not because we needed decoration, but because every time I walk past it, I remember what he taught me without ever saying the words. Build things that last. That's what Cottonwood Ridge is now. And when I'm gone, I hope it still stands not because of me, but because of what we all poured into it. Dignity, discipline, and the quiet justice of building something real where someone once tried to take everything away.